I think for me, what I'd like to see happen is anyone who wants to have access to at least what I'll call basic vestibular technology, that they would have a way to get access. I would love to have every healthcare provider know what the vestibular system is and have some base knowledge on proper referral. I would love to really grow that access.
Imagine this. You're working as a physical therapist, helping patients overcome challenges with their balance and dizziness. But you start noticing a gap, an unmet need in the tools available for accurately diagnosing and treating vestibular disorders. The solutions on the market are either too expensive, too cumbersome, or simply not designed with clinicians in mind. Now, what if that problem led you to an idea? One that would not only change the way clinicians approach vestibular care, but also empower more physical therapists to treat these patients more effectively. That's exactly the journey Helena and Patrick Esmonde found themselves on. Helena, a practicing physical therapist with a passion for vestibular health, and Patrick in IT, in business. Well, not only were they married, they teamed up to solve a critical issue in her field. What started as a simple frustration over inaccessible equipment turned into the creation of a groundbreaking product line that is now making waves in the physical therapy profession. But it wasn't always easy. From the early challenges of prototyping and sewing to manufacturing hurdles and scaling their business to meet growing demand, they've encountered their fair share of obstacles. So, how did they take their vision from concept to reality? What lessons did they learn along the way? And how has their innovation impacted the broader physical therapy community? Today, we'll dive into the story behind Vestibular First with founders Helena and Patrick Esmonde, who turned a shared passion into a business that's transforming the way physical therapists approach vestibular disorders. This is PT Pintcast. First of all, this is the first duo that we've had on the show in this format, and then definitely the first husband and wife. So you guys are starting off on a good foot. You guys are two firsts here, so congratulations. Helena and Patrick Esmonde, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right, let's start off with this. We're going to go macro to micro. Since we're talking to people who've run into a problem, they've tried to overcome or solve and created a solution for us, let's hear the story, which I'm sure you get no matter where you go when people find out what you do. How'd you come up with the idea for Vestibular First and the infrared goggles that help solve problems for clinicians all over? So how'd you come up with the idea, and what problem were you trying to solve, and what inspired that ever so important first step? Who wants to take that one? That's a big triple question.
Sure, I'll start, and then I'll probably hand it off to Patrick. So the idea came out of, as they say, necessity. And that's because I have been doing vestibular care for 15 years, give or take, and I have had the opportunity to use infrared video goggles as part of my practice. And I had a period of time where I had not used them before that. So I very much was aware of the difference, not just what the literature says, but what my own personal experience kind of verified is that they're really essential. And to do my best job, I wanted to have them. And so I was working in a clinic that had some, so that was great. And then I needed to change jobs for, kind of life reasons. And I went to a clinic that had never had a vestibular clinician. So of course they didn't have goggles. And so I asked my new bosses, like, can I have this equipment? This is really important. And they said, how much is it? Tell us more. And so I did my due diligence and showed them the options. And they said, we can't afford any of these. And so I was pretty disappointed. And I was talking to Patrick about it, as you do, talk to your spouse about your life. And I said, I want this new job and this works for our life as a couple and a family, but I really need this equipment and they can't get it for me. And, what do you think? Have you ever made anything like that? I know it might sound unusual, but I was thinking maybe we could try to figure out a solution. And so that's the problem we were trying to solve, is an affordable option for equipment for best practice for vestibular care. And that definitely inspired Patrick to take the next step, and I'll let him tell about that.
Yeah.
Sure. So yeah, Helena came to me and said, "Hey, I want this job, but they need this equipment." And even to that point, I don't remember even knowing about infrared goggles. Maybe it had come up at some point, but it wasn't. It wasn't like on the daily discussion. But we went up to her existing clinic that has the goggles, and she just kind of gave me a tour. And my background, actually, I do have a background in photography, as well as IT and electronics. So I looked at it pretty simply and was like, I just need to get eyes up on a screen, without, certainly there are more advanced options with eye tracking and charting and stuff. But from what was shown to me, it was pretty much just eyes on a screen. So I I also noticed that the goggle she had was a repurposed diving goggle. So I kind of, it hinted at the opportunity that there was some off the shelf components that could be used to make a prototype.
Yeah.
So that evening, I went on Amazon, found some off the shelf parts. So I found a VR goggle that you actually you put your own phone into. So it's really just a shell. It doesn't have a screen.
Right.
I gutted that, and I got an infrared camera also on Amazon, and I put it in the place where your smartphone would go, and so that way the camera was looking at the eye, plugged it into the computer, and I had a very rough, certainly not pretty and not functional, but I had a very rough version of eyes on a screen.
Yeah.
And that happened in one night, really.
So this is all taking place in one session after work in one night that you sort of came up with this rough prototype?
So yeah, we went to her work. I ordered some parts the next day, and then probably a day or two later, when all the stuff from Amazon came in, I put it all together. Then she woke up one morning, and my son wakes up a little early, so I had him do a test video as well. So I had a non-me version up there, and that's kind of what sparked the idea that they could be accessible and affordable.
Yeah. I like that. So I don't want to go forward with that, like just highlighting a few things. And again, you've told this story numerous times, but Helena, you didn't just do what maybe a lot of people would have done, myself included, which was sort of complain about the problem, right? You sort of like initiated by presenting it to someone that you know likes to solve problems. Hey, look at this problem that I have that maybe we could solve. And then Patrick, because this is maybe a problem solving, comes with IT and comes with your background, it's probably something that was a little itchy for you that you might have wanted to scratch. But you also came to the problem with, and I'm going to use a pun here, with a fresh set of eyes. And you were able to sort of break the problem down to, so the problem I'm trying to solve is, how do I get eyes on a screen? Okay, if I understand that problem, and you said, Jeff Bezos for the assist, can I get these parts in the next 24 hours and we can have a working prototype? That's a pretty good way to approach a problem. So let's go back to that moment now. So now you've got a working prototype, right? It's not pretty, but it's working. What were the biggest challenges, Patrick, that you encountered in early stages of developing your product? And then how'd you overcome those early friction points?
So the biggest challenge that we had in the very beginning was light blocking. So being able to create an environment where the eyes are occluded from the outside world. And that's something that off-the-shelf VR goggles, they don't do it as well. They don't need to either.
Right.
You're spending most of your time looking at the screen. A little bit of light coming in around the nose or around the sides that's not really a problem. So the cushion that it came with did have Velcro on it, so that's good. And so my first task was, how do I make a more robust, flexible cushion that can still be cleanable? So something that could be on the patient's face, and then something we can manufacture. So I found a YouTube tutorial on how to sew a donut, like how to make a donut using cloth.
Okay.
Which essentially is what a cushion is, just kind of an oval cloth. And so I drafted out a cushion using this idea of how to stuff it with foam instead of the pillow fluff. And I was able to learn. I taught myself sewing, and then I also taught myself how to make a donut to then make a light blocking cushion. That was certainly the number one thing, and the other piece was the VR goggle that we bought from a internally also had light coming in. So I had to design 3D printed parts that would fit in the place. So, for example, you would take the lenses out, and in the slot where the lenses went, I built these little columns that actually would prevent light from coming in and around the corner. So I had to design and test those pieces to be compatible with this off-the-shelf goggle that we were mainly taking apart. But getting light is tricky, and it bounces around a lot. So getting it light proof was probably the biggest technical challenge on what to get working.
And now I've got to have Helena chime in. Clinically, why does light matter? Why is Patrick learning how to sew a donut? Why is light getting in so important clinically for this thing that you're trying to create to even begin to work?
Sure. So the research shows that when we are assessing a patient who might have vestibular issues of some kind, whether they're stemming from the inner ear or the brain, there's going to be associated eye movements we are looking for that could be indicative of certain pathology. And some of those would be suppressed in room light because our brain essentially is trying to help us feel better and not feel as much symptoms. But those are the same eye movements that we want to use to help with diagnosis, so we can sort out what's going on, and then of course what treatment would be appropriate for that. So yeah, pretty critical to removes visual fixation. So this is back in the literature for like over 100 years, and there have been kind of some advancements over time that have allowed us to sort out how to do this, and then in our case, how to make it more affordable.
So now you're starting to lay out all the different problems or hurdles you have to overcome, right? 100 years ago, we understand if you can eliminate room light, you start to see more of the pathology, or a chance to see more of the pathology. Except, I don't know about you guys, I can't see in the dark. So we removed the light, but now the human can't see it. But now you move forward and you say, well, there's this off-the-shelf technology. We can use infrared to actually see in the dark. So we can remove the light, but still be able to see, and make it easier, comfortable to actually don and doff with a patient. Now you're starting to get to, well, a little bit closer to a final product. So Patrick, we'll come back to you. What's the process now of taking this idea to sewing? You probably got at least a dozen donuts sewed at that point.
Yeah.
The concept to actual tangible product. Because right now, not a lot of people, but some have probably gotten to this point in the process. And now things get really hard. So what's the process of going next? How'd you approach things like design, prototyping, and manufacturing, which are words that not a lot of clinicians ever really use in a sentence?
Yeah, and I had no prior manufacturing experience either. Certainly had built, one-off things. I'd done, little, fixes here and there, but nothing at the scale of injection molding and stuff. So, our first goal was to just gain a lot of data. Like, what do people want? We have never started a goggle company before. Helena had only tried one set of goggles. That's the only one brand that she had ever tried. So we really were starting from a green slate, or empty slate. So the first was to make some research units. So we actually made some production style or production quality research units, still homemade. But with the, for research only, we used survey data and basically said, hey, what works, what doesn't work, what features do you want? And from there, we went through a more traditional manufacturing path. So we actually found a manufacturer.
By going to a conference, we should mention that. We went to a conference and someone else had a physical product, which was a shoulder strengthening device. And we said, hey, who makes yours?
How'd you do that?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
we got a
yeah.
referral to a manufacturer. We hired an engineer, like a real engineer, mechanical engineer, and we then said, okay, we know that we can't use this off-the-shelf goggle forever because then
Right.
you become dependent on that manufacturer still making it or making changes or upping the price. Um, so we basically started from scratch with our own design, even getting to the point where we had a test single profile of what we wanted to cover, like a single line of print. And we went around everyone's face. It's like, okay, here's all the different face shapes. Here's our core profile. Is this going to get everything we need? Because we were like, we know we couldn't use the VR goggle, but we also didn't have any reference point to start from. So that's basically started that journey. We once we started building up, we had 3D printers. We make prototypes. We revise prototypes. We had a lot of twists and turns along the way. The one that sticks out in my mind was focus. So the goggle, the VR goggle had a knob on the side that would move the camera back and forth, and that would help focus on the eye. And when we went through the manufacturing steps, we realized that adding in a focusing mechanism adds to the mechanical complexity. It adds parts. It adds things to break. So we got to the point where we actually were trying different lenses and different distances from the eye to see if we could actually get the depth of field, which is the area in focus, wide enough to where we wouldn't need a focusing mechanism at all. And that's actually where my photography background comes in. So understanding the aperture and the different kind of lens types and the effects of depth of field, it actually allowed us to quantify. And I actually took all these lenses and I measured all the depths of field. And just with math, we were able to prove it really saved the focusing mechanism only would have saved 2 millimeters. But then if we got rid of it, we did all those extra parts we could basically eliminate. So those are the kind of things that you do along the way, and we're like, we don't know if we want focus or not, so we test. We build one that has a focusing rig, we build one without. We take a lot of measurements, and it's as long as you're writing it down, it's science. So we wrote it all down, and then that's those are some of the decisions we made along the way.
All right, Helena, we got to come back to you at this point because right now we're using words like injection molds and mechanical engineers and aperture and all these different words, right? So it looks like you're doing a lot of research on the problem still. But right now, at this point, it feels like you're the market. You're sort of still solving this problem for yourself, but you're hoping that there's enough people like you who are frustrated with the situation. You're hoping for that, but you're a clinician, you're a PT, you want to make sure. So how'd you validate the market for this product outside of just Helena? What steps did you take that when you were done with this, when you got a really great product, that there was going to be a demand for it? And then how did you, if you found out there was, how'd you get it to them in the beginning?
Yes. So luckily, there's lots of good data from the American Physical Therapy Association on number of physical therapists. And we were able to gather some ancillary data that showed that about 10% of those physical therapists were doing vestibular care. So that gave us a good solid number to start from that was in the several thousands. So that's a pretty good start. And anecdotally, I guess you could say, I had a pretty good connection with the vestibular special interest group and quite a few vestibular therapists. So I kind of had my own sense of like who has goggles, who wishes they had goggles but couldn't afford any, who would want more goggles if they could afford more, and that sort of thing. And so we started with that number, and then as we went along, we were able to again use some of those connections to say, "Hey, will you try this?" Or we had one very super fan, Margaret Fitzpatrick, who One of her employees was a student of mine, actually, and she had been using goggles for years. And when she found out what we were doing or kind of starting to try to do, she's like, "I have a check for you. Like, send me a pair. Like, I
Wow.
will pay." And the FDA allows research products. I guess you could say, for lack of a better, easiest term is sold, to be sold with the intent that you would not keep that in the market if it's not your final version, and that you will figure out some sort of they don't manage, the FDA doesn't care about the business side very much, except that you can't be marketing and saying, oh, this is cleared when it isn't. They definitely don't want that. But if you're saying, hey, we're labeling these clearly, and this is the process that we're going through, and this is how we're going to gather this feedback, which they actually want to see, that you've done some kind of process. Now, it could be like, especially de novo products, you're going to be doing, of course, research studies and things like that. Because this technology is known and there are other products that are considered to be equivalent, substantially equivalent, and have already been known as safe, that allowed us to go through this process of, putting these out, kind of as they were, using, the specs that we know were kind of within line of the others, as far as like what's the strength of the infrared light, the wavelength, that kind of thing. And then we had ready customers. And what we decided to do as a business was say, okay, you get this product very affordably. It does the job. You give us feedback. When we have our actual kind of official manufactured version, not the prototype version, we will swap that out for you. So from a financial perspective, huge deal, but they are giving, I guess I would say, their time to give us the feedback, and understanding that that first version was going to be not ideal.
Right.
It did the job, but it could be improved. And so they were kind of agreeing to that. And so, Margaret started that, and then we had a network of vestibular clinicians that I was able to reach out to say, do you need this? Who do you know needs this? And just kind of informal marketing to start, until we were able to officially market more formally, when we had FDA clearance. You want to add to that, Patrick?
No, that's right.
Yeah. I mean, from what I'm hearing is, on one end, we've got Patrick gaining new life skills from YouTube on sewing donuts. And on the other end of the spectrum, we've got Helena now becoming, or needing to become, sort of an FDA regulations expert. So along this way, there's probably some things, it sounds like, that popped up that in the beginning you didn't understand, that, hey, we've gotten this far, we now need to solve these problems.
Yeah.
But you were able to reach out to people and learn how to solve those problems. And if you ever watch the movie with Matt Damon, The Martian, you solve one problem, then you solve the next one, and then you, hopefully, if you solve enough, you get to go home. So now we're starting to move along, right? You're using words like FDA. You're using words like research goggles. Like, this is becoming a thing. So as this thing, Patrick, becomes a thing and gain traction, what were some of the key strategies you guys used to actually go from this thing to many things and to scale it into a business? It wasn't just one solution for Helena or clinicians like her. This is now a business. So what did you have to employ here, and what growing pains, because there are going to be some, did you experience, and how'd you get over those?
Yeah. So the first prototype that I built, I was still working as a consultant and working full time in industry in IT. So this is definitely something that the sewing machine was on the dining room table. It was just us. Very homegrown. As we started to get traction, we started to see the people really engage with it, and then the referral rate, and people saying, "Oh my gosh, you got to check these out. They've got this this great product." Even though it was rough, it was still better than nothing, and there was the potential there for they saw the potential where we were going with it. So I started full time about a year and a half after that point.
Wow, it's fast,
and it was relatively fast. But basically, once once we hit a threshold in the bank, I was like, okay, like that's enough of a cushion for me to kind of safely leave what I was doing full time with all the benefits and stuff to go, basically do this full time.
Yeah.
And shortly after that, we hired our first full-time employee as well to keep up with the production demand, but also the other products that we had done. So it was around that time we started looking at the anatomical models as well, which kind of happened a little bit after the goggle. But as we were starting to explore the space, we noticed that, at least I had noticed from the outside, that the vestibular world was pretty anemic with like quality vestibular models that were good for teaching and good for patient facing. So that's another area where I was like, waiting for paperwork to get done or waiting for feedback to come in. Like, I spent some time working on models as well
Sure.
and developing those.
All right, I'm going to ask you both the same question. We'll go Helena and then Patrick. And I didn't prepare you for this one. That's why I like this question. Was there a moment along the way, there had to be, and I want to know what it is for each of you, because it might have been different, that you realized that this was a thing? This wasn't just kind of something fun or a pain point or isn't this cute? When did it, for you, Helena, like, oh man, this is a thing. This has gravity.
Yeah, so some of this process happened during COVID. And so we're definitely had some additional challenges in various aspects, as you can imagine, with that, like lack of in-person contact with folks to kind of let them know about, our product and things like that. But what I'll say is we had pretty consistent response. And so when we were edging towards FDA clearance, which we got in November 2020, and we had a bunch of people pre-ordering saying, I want this. As soon as it comes out, I want one. And I'm like, that's a good sign. Like
Yeah.
that to me was like, okay, like I think this is gonna float as a business. And for me, as much as my one sister teases me that I'm going to buy an island someday or something, to me, when I get excited about the financial aspect, it's about being solvent so that we can continue to solve problems. We have enough income from the goggles. Okay, we're going to work on this next product. Okay, we're going to do this next vestibular model. Okay, like someday I might even get my own not-for-profit, I've been promised, so that we can, find other ways to help support vestibular technology and education in, situations or areas where people don't have as many resources. So this is really what drives me. And I think that kind of turning point of getting a bunch of pre-orders around that time, kind of right before we launched the formal manufactured goggles, Insight goggles, that was a big thing for me. How about you, Patrick?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I love the fact that you have to have different answers here because you came from different directions. So likely, my guess was these were going to be different points. So when was it for you? Or maybe you've never thought about this.
I think that once we got FDA, to me was, like I like to say we have two birthdays. The first birthday is when I made the prototype for Helena, but kind of our real birthday was when we got FDA, because you can't really be a medical device company without FDA. Yeah. And so to me, that was the like, okay, this is really real. Like, we can actually go out and sell this. We can, we had a lot of hospitals that weren't able to participate in the research program. So we had a backlog of people saying like, hey, when you get FDA, like, I want our whole network to have these. So we had, we certainly had promises, but then, kind of tying in a little bit to what Helena said, the pre-orders, but the pre-orders came after FDA. Like, so to me, that is when, all the pieces came together, the business, the regulatory, the engineering, because at that point, for FDA to clear something, they actually have to clear the final version. They
Sure.
can't clear a prototype. So we were already out all the money for the molds and all the different pieces. Like, we had to, you front load a lot of these expenses. But once we get FDA, that was like huge, because then it was like a little bit of an external validation. Like, okay, like, it was a lot of work. It was 700-page document to submit and, countless hours to get it done, but we could do it. Like, we were able to do it even without having prior experience, launching a medical device.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to use that phrase too there, which is external validation, which is this is also something a lot of organizations probably get to, and this is the final hurdle for someone
Yeah.
else, right? Who says to do this, you have to do these things, and this is simple but not easy.
Yeah, I mean,
Helena,
I will say that, like, so if the goggles were in the woods and there's no one else around, I would still think they were cool, and I know they'd be useful, but that doesn't mean you can make a business or a life, like
true.
a livelihood out of it. So I think the FDA also validated that this was a career that I could, like, basically shift my IT background into full time, and that had, the external validation for me is just like, okay, yes, this is, it meets all the standards and criteria that makes this a safe and effective medical device, which you can build a company around, and
Yeah.
a long term company.
Here's a question for you. Do you want to boost your clinic revenue by $290 per patient per quarter? Of course you do. That's rhetorical. Physiotech's remote therapeutic monitoring can help you do that, enhance patient outcomes, ease provider workload, and turbocharge your earnings. Kickstart with RTM at physiotech.ca. That's physiotech.ca. And the thing you interact with the most at your clinic, if you're a therapist, like it or not, is your EMR. MW Therapy's all-in-one outpatient PT EMR gives you seamless integration of patient portals, marketing automations, and billing, all at one unbelievable value. Switching over is a breeze too. Kick the tires, take a test drive at mwtherapy.com. And where is your PT career going? It's not rhetorical, that's literal. Embark on extraordinary patient care adventures with Jackson Therapy Partners. Visit them at jacksontherapy.com. This is perfect for physical therapists eager to make their mark, to do what you want to do, where you want to do it. Discover where your career can take you at jacksontherapy.com.
All right, Helena, we'll come back to you. Now we're a thing, and you're doing this. Even though you launched mostly during COVID, like, still a thing. You had some hurdles to overcome, even though you had to put together a 700-page document and have someone sign off on that. And that's not easy. Now let's talk about impact. How is this, these goggles, right, which sound something that sounds so simple, but does something that without it you can't do. How has it impacted the PT community? We'll start with clinicians, but they also touch patients. And then we'll get into what feedback you've gotten from other PTs, because PTs love to talk and they'll give you their honest opinion. And how has it influenced the evolution of what you've been able to do with the product?
Yeah, I think to me, the feedback we've gotten and the impact we've had have been really positive overall, to summarize. And I think as far as the impact, for sure, folks who have been wanting this technology for such a long time, they're just thrilled to be able to afford something that does the job. And we get that feedback time and again in our surveys. We do a lot of continued feedback, even not just past our prototype phase. We're still doing that always. Not just because it's required by FDA, but because we really genuinely continually want to improve. And we have had several batches essentially of goggles. So we've been able to, really help those folks that needed that device, and for people who didn't know how valuable it could be until they had it in their hands. As a student, I didn't really realize what I was missing, that kind of feedback. So that's pretty exciting for folks to really feel like that they can then do their best job, which is something I'm very committed to myself, but I know a lot of clinicians feel the same, and I love supporting that. And I think as far as kind of overall, like, again, wanting to always improve, there are folks who are like, gosh, I would like this, I would like that. And we're like, yes, we're going to work on that. So that we're already working on our next device to do ocular motor testing, which again has been around for a long time, but we're trying to improve access. So, continuing our mission, to me, that's huge.
That's great. All right, this next question is for both of you. We'll go Patrick first. What advice would you give to we'll stay within our profession of physical therapy, but really I'd like to start to open this up, and it's always great when it's a real person, right? It's Helena solving a problem that she had. So we'll change the question. What advice would you give to other healthcare professionals who have an idea for a product, but aren't sure where to start? Maybe they don't know how to sew donuts at all. What lessons have both of you learned that could help them on their journey? Essentially, what words of wisdom would you whisper as someone as you took them under your wing?
Yeah, I can definitely say, now that I'm in the industry, even though I'm not a clinician, I could definitely say that the PTs in particular, OTs also are up there with just there's a high degree of inventiveness that they have to do on a daily basis to accommodate their patients, whether that's dealing with a mobility issue or a limitation of their movement. They're very, very creative. So if they don't have the engineering skills, and I'm using engineering broadly, like it can even just be, know how to cut some wood and, glue stuff, make physical objects. Being able to find someone like a resource who is good at that, to be able to get their ideas not just on paper, but something tangible they can touch. The I recognize that PT school doesn't teach their students how to be engineers necessarily. However, I think that there are some innate qualities that actually make PTs uniquely suited to be entrepreneurs in this space, and part of that is just again their resourcefulness and inventiveness towards finding solutions. The I think that the in terms of identifying a product, that's pretty easy, and that's pretty standard. You look, it's like look for what people are complaining about. The reason Lyft and Uber took hold is because people really weren't happy with taxis. Like they got them A to B, but they were a little bit smelly, and like they never showed up on time. They got drivers that weren't reliable. So they put that space opened up because the taxis weren't delivering, they weren't meeting the expectations of the customer. So anytime you hear, oh, that I wish this was a little bit tighter, or oh, this always keeps falling off, or there's opportunities. There's an opportunity there. Now maybe there's not a cost-effective solution for it yet, but in our case, part of it was waiting for the technology to catch up. 20 years ago, if we had tried this 20 years ago when 3D printers were $15,000 and off the shelf infrared cameras that plugged into USB were not a day away from Amazon, that would have looked very different for us to be able to try and make something like this. But the fact that I was able to do it from off the shelf parts just speaks to that. We kind of leapfrogged over a number of legacy technologies. There's no Helena had a DVD or a VHS recorder for some of her goggles. We didn't know. We went right to the computer.
Right.
We at that point most people had laptops, so we didn't have to worry about a dedicated machine. And that's that again. We couldn't have done that 20 years ago.
So I feel like the lessons that I heard you say is number one, you don't have to do it alone. So if you get
Don't
stuck,
do it alone.
you can
Yeah.
100% phone a friend or make a friend.
Yep.
The other is instead of running away from complaints, start to listen intently when there are
Yeah.
complaints. And then the third lesson that I think I heard you say was sometimes it's not right now. So to continually
Yeah.
pay attention to what has changed and what can I use to adapt to that. Helena,
Yeah.
he covered some big ones there. Advice. Is there any that he didn't that you'd want to share? If, with a clinician who is maybe what I call on the edge of a diving board. Like they're thinking about it, but they're not sure if they should leap or not.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I can definitely speak to a clinician's mindset of time. There's a sense of like there's not
Mm.
enough time. We have so much to get done, documentation. I got a call about this patient's AFO, what have you. So, would say that it's a choice for sure. You might say, I have an idea, but you know what? I think that's not where I'm called to do is to really kind of drive an idea forward. But you might have a second person who says, I have an idea. I do feel called to it. I'm going to quote unquote make the time. And maybe that means you give up personal time, which certainly I think anyone who starts a business, whether it's your traditional private practice physical therapy clinic or it's running a medical device business, you're going to make choices and make sacrifices, right? So you want to make sure you're passionate, I guess would be my advice. Like if you're just kind of like, oh, I think I could do a better TheraBand, but you don't care about it that much, unless it's really easy to achieve, which chances are someone would have already done it if it was, then maybe that's not what you're called to do. And that's okay. But, I certainly felt very strongly, Patrick, kind of got maybe the vestibular bug from me a little bit, and became more passionate about helping people with dizziness and understanding that physical therapists help so many different people in so many different ways. But I think that anyone who's had vertigo or dizziness or unexplained falls, it can be a really huge, for sure, life impact there. And so I think for me, at least, it's not only worth it to help patients. We've helped literally millions of patients. We did the math on a conservative estimate, millions of
Wow.
patients that have been touched by our goggles. So that's pretty awesome. And then, of course, empowering these clinicians, again, to feel like they can do their best job and create educational support for them, which we've also done. So just really being a part of the greater vestibular community, which there are so many wonderful clinicians, researchers, and advocates, educators. And so being able to really be a part of that and to really help, someone's like, oh, I'm running a course. Can you put it up on your social media? Happy to do that. Like, I really love that, like, we have been able to grow in such a way that we have a bit of a name, a good reputation, I think, that we're able to help in so many ways. So yeah, for me, like, if it's your passion, you'll be able to sort it out, find the right resources, ask the questions, look for the people to help you. You do not have to do it alone. I totally agree with Patrick on that. Um, and then let your passion carry you forward, and just keep being open to feedback, which most clinicians, hopefully we get a lot of practice with that when we're in our rotations and internships. And so that's something we want to continue to do so that we can, be more helpful.
Sounds like your first step was something I avoided at all costs during PT school, which was a self-assessment or a reflection. Like, hey, is this a problem I'm going to be passionate on solving a week, a month, a year from now? Or is it something I just wish someone else would hopefully solve, right? And really do that self-assessment, right? Because you're going to, as you mentioned, you're going to need to invest something: time, effort, money, blood, sweat, tears, and
All the
then
above.
all the above, a mixture of all the above. And then I also heard you talk about calling, which is, hey, what will this allow me to do or access or help or yes and for a group of people, or for a pathology, or for a community, right? So you're able to super serve this community that was similar to you. We went back to that. How did you actually decide if this was a viable market? Is you looked at yourself and then others. All right, last question I'll ask is for Patrick. You told me the story, and people have to know. Vestibular First. Why is it called Vestibular First?
Yeah, so the name, one of the original names that we were brainstorming was kind of got to the heart of what Helena wants, and it was called Goggles for the People.
Okay.
And that actually did make it into our our mission, like on our like one of our stated missions, and that's the idea of keeping it accessible. But I'm the ideas person, in the sense, or everyone is able. I like to get ideas from everybody, but my brain tends to spider out and tends to say, okay, well, I can do this and I can do that, that, and that. And so I had just built one of the initial versions. And while I was looking for infrared cameras, I also noticed that infrared goggles, like night vision goggles, were also really expensive. And I was like, well, what if I mounted our cameras on the front, had used the smartphone on the inside? I could make a night vision goggle for like $100 instead of it being like 600 or 700. You use a
Right.
smartphone and this and that. And as I'm telling this to Helena, she's like, she knows me by now. We've been married long enough, and she knows how my brain works in that way. But she's like, okay, she's like, that's great, but let's do vestibular first. And I was like, wait, there's the name. Like
Yes.
that's the name right there. So it happened. It came out of Helena's knowledge of how my brain works, but also knowing, she is the marathon runner and I'm the sprinter. So, she knows I'm going to get distracted, and, I'm going to find 5 other things to do. So she's definitely the one who helps keep the focus on the long-term goal. And, I think that the name stems from that direction setting.
Parting shot, I usually keep pretty open-ended ended, but I wanted to be a little more specific, especially with the series and we're talking with people in similar situations. But 5 years from now, what would happen for you to say, hey, this is even more of a success? It's already become a business. It's already this thing that you're able to touch millions of people, as you mentioned. But you have to set a goal like a PT, otherwise you won't achieve it. You won't know when you've gotten there. So for each of you, in the next 5 years, what are some things that might happen for you to consider it more of a success? Helena, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I think for me, what I'd like to see happen is anyone who wants to have access to at least what I'll call basic vestibular technology. So what we have are entry-level infrared video goggles, ideally even entry-level ocular motor recording of those tests, SACODs, and so forth, that they would have a way to get access. So whether that's through purchase, and again, perhaps through our not-for-profit. I don't know if 5 years is reasonable if we're going to be on the 10-year mark for that one, but I would love to really grow that access. And with that, I would love to have I would love to have every healthcare provider know what the vestibular system is and have some base knowledge on proper referral. I see a lot more physical therapists and other healthcare providers, occupational therapies getting into some vestibular care now, which I think is awesome. Seeing more other kind of specialty like physician assistants who work for ENTs who are kind of branching out. So the more people we can get who are going to be direct sources of support for these patients and to be a part of what I'll call the broader vestibular healthcare community, I just want to see that grow because I know right now there are huge gaps for patients where they have a need, but there's no one close to them physically to help them, or they're not sure how to get information. So I just want to grow that to the level of the heart and the lungs. Almost everybody in the US knows about the heart and the lungs and who I should probably see if I'm having a problem with them. So if we can get to that level and we can be a part of that like educational process, I'll say, and kind of connecting those healthcare providers, which we're working on with the ZCare Network, which is a separate company, but still ours. I think that to me, like it all goes together.
I mean, goggles for the people is good, but the
Yeah.
stethoscope for the vestibular system, if you want to expand to heart and lungs, sort of feels like a good explanation. 5 years, you can accomplish that. Patrick, same question. 5 years from now, what might success look like, or more success?
Yeah, so definitely on the product roadmap side, the ocular motor goggles that Helena has mentioned that'll basically allow us to do the full set of tests. We initially chose the infrared first because we knew that had the highest demand, and it had the least number of substitutes. Because you can do the follow my finger with a in room light without goggles at all. So whereas infrared's a little bit harder to do that ad hoc. The other piece is being able to bring eye tracking and making that accessible. So part of my background is actually data visualization. So we're working on a way to make it to where a brand new clinician who doesn't know how to read line charts are able to intuitively see the eye movements in a way that make it even quicker and more accurate to diagnose. The eye movements is something that they're very subtle, they're really fast, and sometimes they're hard to observe carefully. And so part of that, my kind of the other piece I know I have to add to the space is, making very intuitive and accessible eye tracking visualizations that'll make that even easier for all the allied professionals, not just PTs. And then I think the last piece, Helena alluded to it, is the launch of DizzyCare Network. So a technology that came out of Mayo Clinic, basically helping to connect undiagnosed dizzy patients to the right clinician the first time. That's something that we're working on, and I anticipate if that goes well, then within 5 years, my goal is to have, let's say 100,000 patients connected to the right clinician without bouncing around, for 3 to 6 months and seeing multiple specialists.
Well, sounds like a good team. And here's the simple way to know that is without being prompted and without coordinating, you both essentially said access in different ways for different people, for different reasons. But your goal in 5 years is increase access in different ways.
Yeah,
so I
absolutely.
think that shows some alignment. Well, thanks so much for coming on here. My goal for success for not just this episode, but for the 5 that we're doing in this series is in 5 years, if someone DMs me and says, hey, I heard your interview with this person and look what I've done. How cool would that be? So for me, it's someone
awesome.
hearing it and then being able to say, I've heard it enough. I've heard these stories. Why not me? Why not this? Why not now? So that's success for me.